spare capacity implies that it's being sold at a much lower price compared to traditional data centers. And one of the biggest complaints that I've heard while I was working at Microsoft Azure, as well as Cisco as well, is that cloud's expensive. And the bigger play for developers was data residency and latency. If you're serving customers in Canada and you're processing data of Canadian citizens, you need a data center there. If you're processing data of Turkish citizens, you need a data center over in Turkey. We have a data center over there. And that's a massive value proposition if you really want to be compliant from a data residency perspective.
How was the process of fundraising? Because we've always hearing a lot of interesting stories about that. Founders who speak to like more than 100 investors, founders who sometimes raise it on the other side in 7 days, right, and get 3 term sheets in 7 days.
We went through the process twice, once for pre-seed and seed, and then those definitely were 2 different experiences, because for pre-seed, neither my co-founder and we didn't know how the process works. So what I did, I bought this.
The Cloud Frontier podcast is brought to you by Simplyblock. In this bi-weekly podcast, we explore cloud infrastructure startups, founder journeys, and discuss cutting-edge cloud technologies. Join us as we uncover the latest innovations shaping the future of cloud computing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Cloud Frontier podcast. Today's guest, Mihai, is the founder of NodeShift. Welcome to the show, Mihai.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob, and great to see you again, because the first time we met was over at KubeCon.
Right, indeed. We've had a nice chat at KubeCon Paris, and since then we've been in touch here and there. So why don't you maybe tell our audience as well a bit more about yourself and about NodeShift, obviously?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do a quick run through. My name is Mihai, originally from Moldova, but grew up in the UK. From a traditional enterprise background, I worked over at Cisco Systems in the Bay Area in California, where actually I've met my co-founder as well. After this transition over to Microsoft Azure, again, kind of in the networking/cloud space, after which I did a quick transition over to Twitter. That was way before the whole Elon Musk drama. And then for my latest role, I was over at Epic Games as well. When it comes to academic background, also very cloud focused. I did my thesis in one of my dissertations over at Oxford University on the topic of democratizing access to cloud infrastructure.
Right, perfect. I mean, that sounds exciting. That's like, I don't know which topic to pick up on. I think there's like a lot of things we could deep dive into. So maybe the first thing. So you met your co-founder. You said you met your co-founder at Cisco, right? So I guess you guys both worked there. And you left. You've done a lot of couple stints. But like, how did you guys then? Did you live together? Like, how did you end up yet again together, and how did you come up with the idea to start NodeShift?
Yeah, sure. So for reference, my co-founder, Andrei, he's a rocket scientist by degree, transitioned over into the cloud/networking space.
An actual rocket scientist.
Yeah, an actual rocket scientist, our aerospace engineering, responsible for building rocket engines, and he did quite a big pivot in his career. So he continued working over Cisco Systems in Bay Area. For me personally, I worked in Bay Area for about 1.5 years. I didn't really like California, so I moved back to London. While Andrei, he essentially remained over in San Francisco and continued working at Cisco, where he was initially part of a small team, which grew to be one of Cisco's largest revenue-driving projects called Cisco DNA Center. We kept in touch. We kept as close friends ever since California. What essentially happened is we used to have a small project that we worked on together, which is basically building like a small data center for mining purposes, which is our first venture into the cloud space. But secondly, the way we basically started NodeShift, a friend of ours was getting a hair transplant over in Turkey. So Andrei traveled over from San Francisco to Turkey, and I traveled over from London. A hair transplant lasts about 10 hours. And if you're a guest, you're allowed to like kind of sit there and watch the process, which is not very enjoyable to watch. But you can kind of pass music along. They give you some drinks. And while we were drinking and having a chat, Andrei was basically talking about this space of underused data center capacity and spare capacity being available in a lot of traditional tech companies, in a lot of data centers. And we kind of started to think about the idea of what it would look like to build a cloud platform on top, what it would look like commercializing. Next thing you know, we start working with it as a startup.
Wow, that's again quite a story. So you guys met in Turkey, like you've been assisting your friend who's doing a hair transplant, but like how did this come up really? How does this topic come up? And how did he convince you to really join him build that?
Yeah, we weren't really involved in the process of the hair transplant. Luckily, we weren't picking up the hairs and planting them back in. We were just watching it. But yeah, the way the conversation started was we'd always have back and forth chats with Andrei on anything to do with technology. regardless if it's a new space rocket being launched or something else interesting happening in the crypto space. He just brought it up as any other topic. It seemed very interesting to me because spare capacity implies that it's being sold at a much lower price compared to traditional data centers. And one of the biggest complaints that I've heard while I was working at Microsoft Azure, as well as Cisco as well, is that cloud's expensive. I had customers over at Microsoft telling me that if they could, they would have left for another platform if they didn't have a long-term contractual agreement, which tied them to the cloud ecosystem. So here there was a massive potential where I thought that what Andre was working on was very similar in terms of the value proposition to DigitalOcean, but at a much bigger extent. DigitalOcean is roughly 30% cheaper compared to traditional cloud providers, while here the opportunity was to reduce the cost by 70 to 80%, while also building an entire cloud stack from scratch, which also seemed very exciting as a new task and challenge. So there was no convincing involved. If you kind of see it straight away, you get excited straight away, and you kind of jump in it straight away.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that really sounds indeed like a tremendously ambitious project. So the first thing is like, so what did you do after that, right? So you came up with this idea, but then I guess this requires resources to build, right? So did you guys go straight to fundraise? Did you build some sort of an MVP? How was that?
Yeah, you know how when you get together with some friends and you have a drink, and then you're like, yeah, we're gonna start a business together, and then the next day you're sober, you wake up, and then you kind of forget that it even happened to begin with. Here, the plan was truly exciting. That pretty much the next day we started working on it. Our plan was to actually bootstrap the company and not raise any funding at all. Like, we never had it as a plan to actually raise funds. Our primary objective was to actually go ahead and bootstrap it. We basically continued working for our full-time jobs, Andre over at Cisco, me over at Epic Games, and we essentially used our own funds in order to hire two engineers. And we hired two engineers to basically support us in building the product. It took us probably another 8 months of bootstrapping up until the point where we raised our first round of funding in form of pre-seed.
What did you have at that point, after those 8 months? Did you have some sort of working product, or where were you in that sense?
A lot of gray hairs after the stress that we've been through for the previous 8 months. But if we were talking about tangible things, we did have an initial version of the product where you could start deploying computer-based virtual machines from the data center partners that we've aggregated, both ourselves as well as the Web3 partners that we connect under the hood. We had a community of developers where we roughly had on Discord 2,500 developers at the time on Discord actively using our platform, actively testing our platform as well. The community grew kind of naturally around the product as there was interest. And we had multiple tests where basically we would open access to the platform. Developers would deploy multiple virtual machines, test it. And that was kind of the initial traction that we had prior to actually raising the pre-seed funding.
Wow, that's quite interesting. And so how did you get this community around Discord? Like what was what was the hook for the developers just to really develop cheaper? So those are some sort of people that were looking at alternatives already they were looking for alternatives to the big cloud providers like AWS or GCP or Azure.
Yeah, to be fair, that's what we thought about initially. The majority of developers would be primarily interested in the fact that we are a very affordable cloud platform. That was the case as well, but realistically, what we found out over time, that a bigger value proposition is actually the fact that we have hundreds of data centers across the globe. We're talking about North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, you name it, we probably have a data center there. And the bigger play for developers was data residency and latency. If you're serving customers in Canada and you're processing data of Canadian citizens, you need a data center there. Only Microsoft out of the big cloud providers has a data center there. So again, we send out. If you're processing data of Turkish citizens, you need a data center over in Turkey. We have a data center over there. And that's a massive value proposition if you really want to be compliant from a data residency perspective. Two, from geographical perspective, is latency. Imagine you're a gaming company that has gaming servers or you do cloud gaming streaming. You really need to be very close to your user. Otherwise, they'll have horrible ping, very high latency, and it's going to be impossible for them to essentially be using your service. So again, financial trading as well benefits from latency. Geographical location from a latency perspective and data residency was another layer which interested developers in basically joining our community.
Makes sense. Makes absolute sense. And maybe before we jump further into product, because obviously that's also super interesting. I guess like how it really works, and what are the sort of use cases. But so you said fundraising. So you eventually didn't want to fundraise, but then you decide to fundraise. So why did you decide to fundraise, and how was the process of fundraising overall? Because that's obviously what our audience is really interested in always.
Sure, and you probably know the pain yourself that the big tech companies, they have like 50 people working on one small button, and there's multiple buttons, so you have multiples of 50 people working on small parts of each product. When it comes to a big cloud product like Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS, the investments that they get in order to build what they do, are huge. So realistically, when you realize that you're starting to bootstrap it, only after bootstrapping for a few months you realize what a big challenge you start to undertake. The reason why we started the process to begin with is we realized we needed engineering skill sets, which we personally didn't have, which the engineers that we hired from our sellers didn't have as well, and that in order for us to hire, be able to get them on board, um, it would cost pretty much quite a bit of money in terms of salary payment, right? So we realized, okay, we know our pain point, we know what type of engineering workloads we need, we know exactly what we need to do in order to be able to build the product that we want, that the customers want, first of all, and to be able to scale it. And that required additional funding as well. So that was the moment when we realized, okay, we need to change our tactic and we actually need to go ahead and start fundraising. And the moment was perfect because after you spend your money for the previous, 9 months,
Mm-hmm.
you're much more conscious about what the costs are. So when we started the fundraising process, we were very conservative in terms of what the costs need to be, how much we're going to spend, because when you start spending your own money, you're conscious about someone else's money as well,
Right.
which is what a lot of our investors like pre-seed and seed level as well, because we try to keep the burn rate really low while keeping the productivity pretty high up.
Right. That's clear. And so what happened since then? So you guys raised money. You've raised over $3 million, right? Pre-seed round. And how did you deploy that? So you scale up the engineering, I guess. Like how things changed post fundraising.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest pain point for us was to get more talented engineers on board. And that was the primary thing that we've done, essentially hire talented engineers. Um, the type of engineers that we need is a very niche skill set because we need people that were able to work hands on with hardware, but also can, program on a software level as well. It's pretty difficult to find such talent, and such talent exists in Bay Area and California. Such talent is pretty expensive to begin with. So what we've basically done is we've had former work colleagues and acquaintances that worked for major cloud providers in the Bay Area, and we relocated them over to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where the majority of our engineering team is based, where we're able to reduce, the salaries of such employees by a large margin, while they would get a higher quality of life, because the prices overall in Dubai are much lower. There's no income tax if you
Right.
live there. So the benefits would be huge. This is where we're able to hire a lot of high quality engineers and relocate them to one place and eventually, kind of be productive together. But yeah, the biggest expenditure when you look to our OpEx
Mm-hmm.
are salaries. That's the biggest expense.
Right.
Now we're also trying to diversify it, and actually, as we think about go to market and selling our product, we're also looking into things like paid ads, whether it's Google search, whether it's working with influencers, and that's kind of the next threshold into which we're venturing.
Okay, that's quite interesting, and obviously the approach with relocating people to sort of using an arbitrage a little bit in taxes and then salary levels, right, and the cost of living. I mean, that's quite interesting. I guess that's not something you're going to be doing once you're like really big, but I think to get things started, sometimes that's what you need to do, right? To really sort of, as you said, compete with those companies that have like just unlimited resources, and maybe one more question on fundraising. So, how was the process of fundraising? Because we've always seen hearing a lot of interesting stories about that. Founders who speak to like more than 100 investors, right? And founders who sometimes raise it on the other side in 7 days, right? And get 3 term sheets in 7 days. How was it for you? Like, where are you in that spectrum of fundraising?
Yeah, sure. So we went through the process twice, once for pre-seed and seed, and then those definitely were two different experiences because for pre-seed, neither my co-founder and I, we didn't know how the process works. So what I did, I bought this spreadsheet or Notion document for like $10, which had a list of like 1,000 VCs and their
Right.
emails. And I kind of like, sprayed and prayed. That was before Gmail's new regulations where you can only send like 50 emails per day before you flag the spam. And I just like, kind of sprayed and prayed through that list of 1,000. And that was a great introductory experience because we had a chance of pitching to multiple investors. The initial pitches that we've done, we were actually told by investors, well, this is great, but this sounds like Dragon's Den. This sounds very fishy. Like, the way you guys are approaching this is not the way you should be pitched. So again, like, on the go, we kind of learned what works and what doesn't. So we've done it in a very inefficient way because we didn't have any warm introductions. We kind of started cold emailing everyone. We've heard a lot of no's, but a lot of the no's that we've heard, we continued building the relationships with those VCs and kind of maintaining them as well, letting them know what we've done. So we raised $500,000 for pre-seed. Um, about 6 months later, we raised our seed as well. What we've done is about 2 months after raising our pre-seed, we already started booking meetings for, I think it was the last week of August and the first week of September. And our plan was to basically book as many meetings as possible with VCs for the fundraise for a period of 2 weeks. And I think during the period that we booked around 80 to 110 meetings, something like
Oh, wow.
this, that we conducted within the 2 weeks. By the end of week 2 or beginning of week 3, we already had 2 term sheets. So again, it was very calculated. We already knew who we were going to speak to. We knew how the process works. We knew how to pitch as well. And the only reason we knew that is because we've done a lot of trial and error during the pre-seed stage.
Wow, yeah, that's very consistent with what I've experienced myself and what I've been hearing from other founders, that really like this gaining this momentum and concentrating those discussions is really something you have to do, right, to really get through this process smoothly. But how, maybe again, I said last question regarding fundraising, but maybe one more. Like obviously a lot of people will ask, how do you get to those 100 investors? Like how do you actually make it happen that you schedule in two to 3 weeks, right? Because there's like a lot of people to sort of coordinate. So how did you like physically do it? Was this like a lot of inbound because you raised pre-seed, so they sort of started coming to you? Was it something else? Was it a mixture of things, or how was it?
Definitely wasn't inbound. It was largely for the fact that a lot of VCs that said no at pre-seed, we had a good relationship with them and they still wanted to follow the product. It was just a bit too early for them. They wanted to see a bit more. So what we've done is we continued those relationships with them, and basically upfront we said, "Hey, we're going to be fundraising on that date. Are you interested in speaking to us or not?" So we know we're not wasting your time. We're not wasting your time, and our time as well. And they basically like, someone said yes, someone no. So that's how like we probably got the initial 40, 50 meetings. It happened that we got into the Intel Ignite Accelerated program as well,
Right.
which is a program for deep tech startups. Usually they take on board startups that, late seed, Series A already. They made an exception for us as a startup that with lower funding amount, just because they found the product and the team interesting. So with them, that's where we had a lot of inbound introductions as well, because we were part of the program. We were actually started collaborating with Intel as well, where we resell Intel's own data center capacity through our cloud platform as a result of that. And that's when we started getting a lot of interest, where VCs started speaking to us, and we didn't want to speak with them at the time. So what we suggested, if you're interested in speaking to us, we're going to take meetings last week of August, first week of September, which is how we proceeded. So it was a mix of VCs that said no, so cold leads, and then inbound leads as well, based on the accelerator program.
Yeah, that's clear. That's really yeah, that adds up. Let's say I think that's clear how we can get to it. I mean, I think the learning for others is like you need to try everything. Right, at the end of the day, there's no one silver bullet, right, that will do it all for you.
Yeah,
Okay, I mean, I
how
think
was it for you from this perspective?
I think it was a bit similar, right? So we also had like an early start, right? And we sort of went out there and sort of failed, and then we sort of like went like and actually we did a little bit the same thing. So started scheduling things for later, right? And then we were also lucky, started to getting a little bit more introductions, also doing a little bit more research, right, on who we actually want to raise from. And I think this was really important to also understand who's relevant, who's not, because we're like you, we're rather considered a deep tech startup, right? And it's not every investor will invest really in it. So I think it's quite similar, right? I think, and then when you create that momentum, then when we were in the period of those 2 to 3 weeks where really had all the conversations, then more and more VCs started just coming to us because everyone knew we were fundraising, and I think this was really important that everyone knows that you're really fundraising at the time and you're not just fishing around to see who gives you a good offer, right? And that was our approach at in the first place, and this really failed miserably because VCs know it, like that you're not fully committed, you're not fully fundraising, not everyone knows that you're fundraising, there's something fishy about it, right? So you need to be all in. I think that's also the learning, right? And I think that really reconfirms your approach as well. But the Intel Ignite, and I think any kind of accelerators can also obviously tremendously help with this first step, right? If you're really new to it and you don't know investors, I think that's also helps. So we also had some help from our early investors on that front. But yeah, I mean, great. I think it's a really cool story so far. So as we said, let's go back to the product. So you've mentioned Intel. So actually, you even gotten Intel to work with you on their data center capacity, right? And so now I imagine that it's a little bit like a two-sided marketplace, right? So you have data center vendors, and then you have customers, and you're sort of in between connecting them. So you sort of have to both work on demand and supply side, right? So you need to aggregate supply, so data centers to really have good offering, to also attract customers, right? So how did you go about that? Like what came first, right?
Yeah, and you completely nailed it in terms of the product description. The way we approached it first is actually through a supply perspective. You can't sell something if you don't have anything to sell. I mean, I know some people do. The recommendation for a lot of younger startups is usually, hey, just try to poke around the market to see if there's any interest from the market to begin with. We kind of knew there's already a developer community even prior to releasing the product. So we knew we need to start building the supply, which was a major aspect. Initially, the supply that we wanted to get is from Web3 companies. There's decentralized projects such as Filecoin, where what they do is they build a blockchain that aggregates spare capacity from servers and data centers. The problem with such providers, or not a problem, but I would say the difficulty, if you as a traditional enterprise want to use them, you have multiple friction points. Like you need to know how blockchain works, you need to get a token. Again, there's multiple friction points. Our core idea was, how do we just simply connect a data center directly to us in addition to this and make sure that's an enterprise grade data center? By enterprise grade, I mean 99.99 uptime service level agreements, certified by the Uptime Institute to guarantee that SLA, to have security certificates like SOC 2, ISO. So that was the type of data centers we were after. By working Microsoft and having visibility into what AWS looks like from the inside as well, through friends that work there, what AWS does is basically they have third-party data centers which are white labeled, where you basically deploy into AWS, but under the hood you're not using an AWS data center. You're
like
using
Equinix, for example.
Yeah, exactly. But you're paying the same high prices. Now, what happened here is Andrej and I already had a network of data centers like this that we knew pretty well, just like you mentioned, Equinix, or people that are co-locating in Equinix. Mm-hmm. And that's how we kind of started. Why don't we start with the smaller providers? Why don't we aggregate their capacity? We'll have a non-exclusive agreement with them where if AWS doesn't sell their capacity, why don't they sell it through us? And that initially started with that. And then we're like, okay, why don't we go to telecom companies? Why don't we start speaking to big tech companies? And there was massive interest from their side, because when they look at their operating expenditures through their accounting books, they see that they have 20 to 30% of spare capacity just sitting out there consuming electricity, hardware that they bought that's not being used. So the value proposition from a supplier perspective is huge. Right. So we started initially with that, and that's when we started working on the demand side of things as well.
Right, that makes absolute sense, because my background is in marketplaces, different kind of marketplaces, but I know that marketplace business quite well, and I think in this case it really makes a lot of sense that you started from the supply side, right? Because it's not always so obvious like where to start, but I think that really makes sense. And so right now, as you said, like you're a little bit of a competitor also to big cloud providers like AWS, right? Because I mean, yes, on one hand, you're just really providing an alternative for different use cases and so on. But on the other hand, you do compare yourself to what they offer. So how is that to compete with AWS?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're directly competing with them because let's take a step back and look at a platform like DigitalOcean. So DigitalOcean has about 2% market share. They're currently generating a revenue of around 700 million ARR as of the past year, and they have 2% market share. Where about 70% of their customers are companies that have 50 employees and less. The reason that we're able to grab such a significant market share is that roughly they're 30% cheaper compared to AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud, while also having a very easy to use user interface. Despite all of this, AWS has done nothing price wise in order to battle DigitalOcean because they still see DigitalOcean as too small of a company.
Right.
So who we're seeing as competitors are actually platforms like DigitalOcean because we're initially competing for the same market segment. Like DigitalOcean, like Vultr, like Akamai Technology, the customers that are using those cloud providers, they normally already aren't even looking at AWS or Microsoft of the world. The reason behind it could be philosophical because they don't like one big central entity to own all of their data. They want to have less of a concentration risk and use multiple smaller providers. Or it could be as simple as pricing, they just want a cheaper
Right.
price. Or with a lot of developers and companies, what we've seen, they actually want a nice to use user interface. If you use AWS, you literally need a whole certificate, a whole degree to be able to use it properly. If you look at a platform like
I
ours,
confirm that.
DigitalOcean, yeah, exactly. If you look at a platform like ours, in a few clicks, you already kind of know what and how to do. But if you've used the big cloud providers and you know how they work, all of those skills are transferable with us, where you can use Terraform, you can use GitHub Actions, you can use APIs to automate things. So it's great, both for new developers as well as experienced developers as well. So just to summarize, we're technically not competing with the big cloud providers. The audience we're competing for is the same one as DigitalOcean, as Vultr, as Akamai.
Right. That's very clear. And obviously, I guess you've already practiced that because I'm sure investors always are sort of like, I mean, some are very bullish if you want to compete with AWS, but I guess the majority are scared of it, right? And I think it was a little bit similar with in our case. And in our case, we were also not really competing with AWS. We're actually even more of a partner to them. But again, investors when they just hear that like you're doing something that AWS does, it's just it's just scary, sort of, right?
For sure.
Okay, and so you also touched on it a little bit, but maybe just to dedicate a moment to the use cases of right of why would customer use NodeShift, right? So you said you started with sort of mining and blockchain, but that didn't really didn't end up to be the use case you're going for. So right now it's data privacy, right? To some extent, latency. Like what else? What are the like if I'm a customer wants to use NodeShift, right? Like what kind of problems should I experience to sort of think of you?
Yeah, sure. So there's multiple. Affordability is one. You just want to reduce your operating expenditures, because the bills are high. That's number one. Number two is you care about geographical distribution. You care about it because you want to be close to the customer. So from a latency perspective, because you're a gaming company, or maybe you're a blockchain, a financial company, where latency really matters between data centers. Or free is a data residency thing, where you're processing sensitive customer data, which needs to be processed in one particular country which has those regulations. And if you look at the moment at the global map, if you're processing data of United Arab Emirates citizens, you need a data center there.
Right.
Saudi citizens, you need a data center there. Canadian citizens, you need a data
And
center
how
there.
many countries do you guys have data centers in or data center partners in?
If we're talking about countrywide specifically, it's going to be somewhere around the 70 country mark. Not
Wow.
all of those countries are available on demand basis. Some of them
Mhm.
have to be on a reserved instance basis. On demand basis, we have around 15. But on a reserved instance basis, where you basically commit and they'll make it available for you, it's about 70 locations.
Wow,
Yes.
yeah, that's quite a lot. I guess AWS wouldn't have more than that, right? Or would have more or less the
No,
same.
so we have a bigger geographical coverage, and we're talking just about countries. If we're talking about data center locations, um, with uptime service level agreements, we're talking in the hundreds. If we're
Wow.
talking about without uptime SLAs, we're just like a random small data center in the thousands. Data center for reference, a certain data center, AWS for reference has just under 100 locations.
Mhm.
Microsoft Azure, I believe, last I checked, around 70, 80 locations. So again, in terms of coverage, we have way bigger number of data centers compared to them.
Right. Yeah, that's quite impressive, right? For a seed stage startup. So I think that's really something to claim. And so having that now, like where do you stand? Like what are your main challenges of bringing it to the market, right? Because from the outside, it sounds like no brainer, right? No brainer for the data centers, no brainer for the customers. So like, well, on the other hand, I'm also a founder, and no, it's not as easy, right? So like, what sort of stops you from going really big at the moment?
Yeah, and actually, it would be interesting to get your perspective as well, given that you're in a similar space where, in this space, the biggest amount of money normally is in the enterprise customers. And enterprise customers require a very strict and rigid process of moving forward, third-party risk assessment forms, certifications, very difficult to get onboarded, and the sales process is pretty long as well. The biggest struggle from our perspective is, first of all, it's worth highlighting the product has been tested, the product works, the product provides uptime service level agreements, has the relevant security certifications. The biggest bottleneck moving forward primarily is from getting more public case studies available. So we have some very interesting customers using our platform, but from public case studies, we don't have as many. We actually have one available on our website. Not everyone wants to be a case study, which is also an issue. We actually have one web-free platform that's using us. They managed to reduce their costs by around 75% compared to AWS.
Oh,
That will make an excellent case study, but they don't want to because their competitors will also see it, and
right,
then they will basically also use us and maybe be able to match our customers' price. Again, we're not going after our customers' competitors as potential customers
right.
because if they don't want it, we're not going to do it. But that's kind of like the issue where the bottleneck is you have to build trust. How can you trust a small company
Mhm.
with such important production level workloads? So that's the reason we got security certifications. That's the reason we collaborate with big names like Intel. That's the reason why we, even as investors in our company, we got institutional organizations such as University of Oxford, where they had a very strict due diligence process, both from a computer science perspective as well as business model. Um, to actually get confirmation that this is a
Mhm.
trustworthy product. This is a product that can scale, and this is the product that can actually deliver on what it promises. So we're currently working on building out the trust element. The moment we have trust is the moment where we can actually open the doors and get a large number of customers on board. At the moment, everyone is like, okay, I want to see a few big case studies. Show me like really big case studies so we can move forward and be comfortable with that.
That's clear. That's clear. Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a problem of many startups. But my question would be then: I assume that customers wouldn't like put a transactional database that stores all of their customer informations on your service in like as a first thing, right? They would use it for something else,
You'd be
right?
so surprised. That's exactly what we thought when we started. The first customer we had moved their production level database with their customers over to us.
Oh
That was in the early stage of the product. We were like, we don't want this. We're like, no, like, let's give it a try. And they did, and it worked well. Currently, we're working with a healthcare company as well. That's basically moving over their production level database. The reason they're moving it is because it's the most expensive part. For them, it doesn't make sense to move anything else. They don't want to
right,
move less important stuff. Less important stuff doesn't consume as much. The more important stuff is the more expensive stuff. So
right,
usually, I completely agree with you. When I started this with Andre, we were thinking, okay, you're going to move like staging level workloads,
right.
something that's a less of a priority. But no, once you convince the customer, they're like, okay, let's move with the most important stuff, which is counterintuitive. Which is also the reason why it's much more difficult to also convince them because once they commit fully to this.
Right, but I guess you can somehow mitigate it with offering maybe a good backup solution into back into AWS, right? Like you can just have like some sort of asynchronous replication of their data back into AWS or back into another data center because we offer so many, right? So we probably have many countries where you have like two sort of regions, right? Two independent data centers. I guess those things could help, right?
For sure. And that's exactly how we build the cloud platform from the ground up. The idea wasn't that, oh, you only have to use our cloud platform. We're fully interoperable with the big cloud providers. So, say, for example, there's a customer that has a front facing virtual machine sitting over in AWS, and they're connecting through a load balancer to multiple virtual machines from our side. And if they need to suddenly scale, they just scale with us and they shut it down. Architecturally, they haven't changed much. Their still main stuff is sitting over in AWS, and they use us to scale just up and down, which is again like pretty much a deal. So interoperability is built fully into the product. Not only this, we're currently releasing our virtual private cloud functionality, which is going to allow you to put AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and our virtual machines into one VPC. So like, they're all
Right.
part of the same network. Again,
Mhm.
this is part of our idea and commitment to interoperability. You don't fully have to leave AWS. You can keep your storage, for example, in AWS and use our virtual machines, or the other way around. Or you want to use a relational database over in AWS that is a managed one and connect it to our virtual machines. You can do all of this.
Right. That's something. I mean, I think you're onto something, right? I think going that direction. I think that really sounds like something that should convince customers, right? I think it's not going to happen all at once, but it sounds like it's going to happen, and I'm really excited about your product myself. I think this is really cool. I think that there is a gap in the market. Let's put it this way. I think it's very clear. So it's just a matter of time until everyone realizes that. All right, so I mean, we're slowly have to run towards the finish line. Couple more questions. Maybe last sort of question related to your business and the product. AI. Is there any AI component or machine learning component in it? Like everyone's probably curious about that.
Sure. I mean, the way we look at it is there's a massive AI gold rush. If we compare artificial intelligence to gold rush, we would say like it's the same thing that happened in California back in the day when everyone was rushing to California to start mining gold. It wasn't the people that were mining the gold that were making the big money. It's the people that were selling the pickaxes to mine the gold. And that's the way we're seeing our business as well. We're selling the pickaxes, the infrastructure for you to be able to do your AI workloads. So the biggest thing that we have through our platform is that you have the end-to-end AI ML pipeline. You can basically store your data with us, your big data in like object storage or any form you want. You can then train the data, using our GPUs, and we have a multitude of GPU models from A100s, H100s to gaming retail grade GPUs. You train your models, and then you want to run them for inference and optimize them, and you can do that on our compute virtual machines. So again, from the end-to-end cycle, we've already designed the platform in such a way that you can do everything from the beginning to the very end. Even when you deploy our GPUs, it's extremely easy to deploy predefined templates like Jupyter notebooks, NVIDIA, anything else that you may want. We actually write detailed tutorials on how to deploy Llama 3.1 with 405 billion parameters on 8 A100 GPUs and how cheap it is with our platform. Anyone can go ahead and run it. We've written a tutorial, if you've seen the news, on Apple's LLM as well. We deployed it. We were one of the first to write a tutorial on it, on how you can run very seamlessly and easy on our virtual machines as well. So again, we're very much building, I guess, the underlying infrastructure for other people to be able to build their AI ML products.
Great, that sounds really interesting, and we'll definitely put links to those tutorials in the show notes later for the audience. So so that's going to be there. Maybe just a one follow-up question before the closing questions on that. So, what percentage of our customers actually do use your service for AI workloads? Like, how many people do actually do you estimate use it for AI?
Depends what type of AI you're talking about. If you're talking about anything, I would say the majority. If you're talking about actually doing training, not many. The majority are doing inference. The majority of people, they're taking pre-existing models and running them for inference and optimizing, which I think makes the most sense, because in order for you to be able to train a really good model, like you need a lot of money, a lot of resources. Why do this when you have so many high quality open source models and you can just optimize them and just repurpose them for your particular need? So I would say that the majority do use us for AI in one way or another, but not for training, but for inference.
But they still need GPUs for that, right? So
Yes.
GPU is still like a service that you're sort of selling a lot of.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
for sure. But yeah, not GPUs aren't even just good for the AI segment side of things. We, unbeknownst for us, open it for cloud gaming purposes as well. If you're building a cloud gaming product, you want to do cloud gaming streaming, it's also a perfect use case for that. Or remote desktop connections. If you're hiring an outsourced team, you don't want to buy a laptop. You just buy a few, rent a few GPUs, virtual
Right.
machines, and you give them access to that, and they can do AutoCAD work or like some motion effects and so on those GPUs.
Right. That's clear. Thank you for clarifying. All right, so let's move on to the two questions that I normally ask everyone. The first one is, what are the resources, and this could be a blog post, a video, a book, a movie, a research document that help you shape your sort of conviction on how the cloud infrastructure is going to look like in the future, or help you build a conviction on what you're doing.
Oh, in the cloud infrastructure space in specifically, or for startups?
I think in cloud infrastructure more specifically, yeah.
That's an interesting one. From our perspective, I wouldn't say it's even people. Maybe there is one person that I actually follow religiously.
Mm-hmm.
It's DHH, the
All right.
founder of Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
I think his article on him moving from AWS over to on-premise was actually eye-opening for a lot of people,
Right.
who
So
couldn't
the
understand why we can
case.
exactly. And a lot of people couldn't understand why we can be so cheap and affordable. And that was a clear example. If you're running your own infrastructure on premise, the price difference is huge compared to big cloud providers, because they're putting a big markup margin. And by him doing this exercise and documenting every single product that they've used on AWS, by how much they've reduced it, what was exactly their investment, and how quickly they made their money back. I think they made their money back literally in a couple of months from transitioning to AWS. And he still posts a lot of stuff, not just related to cloud, but the cloud, just development work in general. But his work on cloud specifically, and those articles of being transparent, have really been changing for us.
That's a good one. I also follow him, and I'm familiar with that case. We'll definitely put it also in the show notes for those who don't know him. And I think obviously that repatriation case, it triggered a lot of discussions, because this obviously it's sometimes apples to oranges, but I think, as you said, he's always very transparent, and it's super interesting to really look at that. All right, and the last closing question, really. So what is the most exciting thing right now that you see happening in the cloud infra space?
Ooh, there's a lot. I think for me personally, it's more from the hardware perspective. I really like that a lot of the GPU workloads are being moved away from NVIDIA hardware, and being looked at, Google's manufacturing their own equivalent chips, AMD's producing their own thing. I think at the moment, everything that's being pumped into AI ML stuff is going into NVIDIA's pocket, which is good for NVIDIA, but I don't think it's good for the ecosystem. And I think the industry could really benefit from, there being more hardware manufacturers, that would have quality GPUs. Intel really dropped the ball big time on this by not having, by not making on time a quality product. And I personally get excited whenever I see any competitor of NVIDIA, as much as I love NVIDIA, whenever I see any competitor of NVIDIA's actually producing something new that hopefully will be able to stand out and compete against NVIDIA. I know there's, I forgot what the company is called, but there's a startup.
Grok. I think Grok, right? That they just raised like 600 million round. Is that
are those the guys that are producing hardware specifically for LLMs? Like, you can run LLMs and train them for a very low price? Maybe it is them?
It might be, but like just this week they've raised like 600 million to compete with NVIDIA. We can check that later and put in the show notes if it's Grok or not, but yeah.
Exactly. I'm going to look into it as well. But I think those are the type of news that get me excited at the moment, where we know that whatever service we're building, or whatever AI ML engineers are going to be using us, they're going to have a choice of multiple different types of hardware, like they do with compute. When it comes to compute, you can choose AMD, you can choose Intel, you can choose something else. So you have this full optionality. And we really do want to see the same thing when it comes to GPUs too.
Right, yeah, and I think we'll definitely see it. I mean, as of today is August 12th, 2024. NVIDIA's price is $110. So, let's see where that price is a year from now. I think obviously, even if they're disrupted, they can still tremendously grow, because, the market keeps growing like that. But I think that's going to be an interesting one. And that's obviously going to have an impact on the whole of tech and cloud infrastructure. All right, Mihai, that was really great. That was really a pleasure having you. I mean, is there anything else you'd like to share to the audience? Anything else people like to know about you or about NodeShift? And obviously, again, we'll put stuff in the show notes, for the audience to really tap onto those resources.
Yeah, no, I just want to say a huge thank you for inviting me over. For anyone that's interested in trying NodeShift out, we do have demo calls available that you can book directly through our website. We do have, as an additional benefit, support directly available 24/7 with our platform as well. So again, if you want to give it a try, hit us up. You can get a free trial by just signing up to the platform with credits available to deploy virtual machines, or you can reach out to our team directly.
Perfect. Thank you, Mihai. It was great having you, and all the best with building.
Awesome. Thank you. You too.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our discussion. Cloud Frontier is brought to you by Simplyblock, an intelligent database storage orchestrator. Get more IAPS and lower latency for your databases in the cloud. Visit our website at simplyblock.io for more information.